their orientation, and this goes back to some of the stuff that was on the first slide, but you'll kind of get it as we have the conversation around what their experience is, and based on how workplaces have shifted, what they observed with their parents or grandparents and their peers, their attitudes about career is very different than the millennial. I think the first one is the most interesting to me, which is really about, millennials were about freedom, flexible, kind of my way, right? Gen Z is structure, stability. Like, the world has been in chaos since they were born, and everything's been disrupted and changing all this time, and they're just like, can y'all just settle down? That's what I'm looking for. And that's a very different attitude of the employees that are coming in terms of what they're looking for at a kind of an emotional level in terms of a contract with an organization. Many of the other things are going to feel like maybe, obviously learning is more, that kind of thing. And then at the bottom, I thought this set of language is really interesting that, I think it's actually on the previous slide, that they talk about Gen X as digital immigrants and millennials as digital natives, and then this generation is technoholics. Like, it's not an option or something I just know how to do, it's actually part of how I operate. And so that's just a different orientation. To me, I was like, I'm an immigrant. But I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, I had to figure it out. I remember like learning when at the time we used to pay for minutes back then, I mean, it's like, there's a whole bunch of stuff I learned the hard way. But my point is that orientation, when we think about that mindset, influences how they think about employment. So one of the topics that came up as we brainstormed this was mental illness and kind of emotional stability. So Eric, you had some comments to share.
Yep. Yes, it's certainly something in our space that we've seen a lot more of, and I think it's a two-way, it's something to approach with a dual mindset, I think. And sometimes previous generations have been very guarded around their emotions, not things that they want to talk about or express, but we're finding that this generation, and the millennials to a degree as well, are much more open and expressive about the things that they're managing in terms of stress levels to a large degree. We're really seeing a higher instance of communication and expression around depression and anxiety mostly. And you can imagine we do have a little bit of a pressure cooker environment to some degree. I suppose things will come out, in an education environment. But part of it's really healthy. And I think that going back to some of our conversation about emotional intelligence, we're using it as opportunities to talk about how do you manage these in healthy ways, and how do you develop coping skills and mechanisms. But we've developed new structures within our organizations, and I don't know how this might relate exactly to human resources, but you might be able to draw some parallels. But a common practice now is to have a behavioral intervention team. And it's really, unfortunately, it's really been out of the tragedies that happen around mass shootings on campuses or high schools in particular, but it's a nexus that we create across our institution to say, this is how you tell us when you see things that are going on. And we don't do it just with our faculty and staff, but we do it with other students. Like, oftentimes those peer relationships are the things that are letting us know that students are in duress or having a hard time managing their emotions or their current state of stress or anxiety. And it's just, for me, I think it does create very healthy conversations and reduces stigmas around this. It makes our work a lot more complicated. I'm sure from an HR advantage, you can certainly share that perspective. But I think there's a lot of growth and opportunity here. And I think a couple of you have shared, as we talked about, what it might mean in terms of the environment and benefits that you do extend to students. So for me, it's something that helps us establish a culture of safety too, which I think we want for a learning environment, and you want it for a performance and a best fit and engagement as well. But I think that you have to be prepared that this is going to be an elevated conversation in your organizations.
Yeah, and I sort of just want to echo that from professional organization perspective. What we've seen a lot of is our clients utilizing EAPs, so employee assistance programs more. I had an opportunity to speak with our friends over at Pine Rest, and they mentioned that they've really seen a rise in employers sort of signing on to employee assistance programs and offering that as a benefit for individuals. They've seen a rise in trainings that people are requesting them to come into organizations and do trainings around stress and stress management, work-life balance, wellness, any variety of topics. They've seen an uptick in the utilization rate, so not only are employee assistance programs being offered, but folks within organizations are actually utilizing that. And then I think I've seen in my own client experience that employees are more likely to A, know what an EAP is and that it exists, and B, sort of actively be seeking out to their manager about receiving those services. So it just seems like there's a greater level of awareness that's happening, and I think part of that is some of the stigma around mental health issues being broken down.
With the hiring side of the mental health, I have noticed, and I was talking to these guys about it when we met for coffee, was how open the new employees are with that. You know, I used to, when I first started, you'd say, you're going on a cashier, and they'd say, okay. And now I say, hey, you're going on a cashier, and it's, no, that's not okay with me. I don't like that pressure. And it was really something that opened my eyes that one size did not fit all for the current generation, and we probably missed that with people we first hired and brought on, is we weren't putting them in comfortable situations because we assumed that everything was going to be okay because it was previously. And now they're way more comfortable just letting us know that, hey, I want to be trained a different way. I want to be in the back. I don't like being talking with people, or, you know, if they're the other way, I want to be outside in front with people. It's something that we've really seen. Instead of me telling them where they want to go, they would like to tell me where they want to go and spend a benefit for both of us. Yeah, it was a good lesson I've learned the last couple of years, is being able to listen to them, how they want to work, where they want to work, and it definitely helps out.
Brianna, do you want to cover the third topic we want to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we were going to talk about skill development really briefly, so I'll just sort of tell an anecdotal story. So one of my clients that I worked with, they had an employee who was in an entry-level office position, and maybe 6, 7, 8 months in, he said that he was going to take another position if he didn't sort of get a career progression path or an increase in pay. And so it was one of these funny moments where I'm talking this through with a client on the phone, like, how do we keep this individual at the organization? And our client who's older was like, well, no offense to you, but all you millennials care about is paid time off and more money. And so I'm like thinking in my head, like, first of all, he's an iGen, so millennials are so old news. What are you talking about? But I think it really speaks to some of the expectations of this new generation that's coming into the workforce, especially when you think about stability and structure. I think there's really a desire there to sort of say, how is the organization investing in me? How are they growing in me? Or how are they growing me? Can I see a clear career progression here? Or does this feel like I'm coming into this position, but it's a dead end? And I think that the folks coming into the workforce are really wanting to have that knowledge that that's going to be part of the job. And I think that what I've seen is if that's not there, that's fine, but it has to be compensated for, and it's gonna be benefits. So more money, more time off, but there has to sort of be like an exchange of services. So that's what I'd say to the skill development piece.
As we're talking about this, how I've seen this manifest is that students who were exiting early before they completed a credential or degree, and the get off my lawn side of us was like, they just want instant gratification. They don't want to put the time in to get the degree. And I think what you shared, Blythe, at the beginning really resonates around this, is that they want structure, they want clarity, they don't do well with ambiguity. So how this might shape in terms of a work environment, we have to really help them chart this out, fit this into their lives, and so that they can see the milestones that they need to hit as they go along. Because for them, seeing that end product that could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road is very difficult sometimes, especially when they have a lot of competing things. So I think that clarity helps them manage those longer term commitments and investments that they need to make.
So as America's Best First Job at the Whitecaps, what we are seeing is when someone's coming in, they are wondering how this will benefit them down the road. This was something new that we've also noticed. It's not just they're looking for the money, it's, hey, I'm going to come work here in the summer, but can you put me in a spot that's going to help me in my career down the road? And that's something new we've noticed with iGen that we haven't seen before.
So perfectly timed. We're ready for questions. Do you want to stand up? Just speak loudly so we can hear you.
I don't mean to throw you into a topic that you may or may not have prepared for, but I'm wondering your thoughts, or anybody else in the room, on this generation and the job hopping kind of culture, and not being able to see themselves at a job for 20, 30, 40 years like one of their parents or grandparents may have, because I'm kind of like right on the border of that. So navigating what your perceptions of as hiring managers, and like, oh, is that going to look bad on a resume? And then so many people kind of conversely say, no, like that's the generation we're in now, is the job hopping. So
One comment on this that I thought was fascinating is that it's related to this, but it's a little bit of a, like, the world we're living in now versus the world we were in before, is that skills get to obsolescence in 5 years. So based on that, people have to reinvent, organizations have to reinvent, or the skills you need, you don't have for what the work is. And so based on that, to your point, job hopping is still a dynamic of how do you get people to attach and commit to the organization. But the time frame of 20 years would mean if they stayed at the same organization, they would have had to reinvent themselves 4 times in terms of total new skill set revamp in that job, maybe in that organization. And I don't know any of you, when stuff changes around you, you kind of look up and go, am I in the right spot? So I think there's something that's going on in our environment in general around this, but I'd love to hear your comments about specifically this generation and this issue we definitely saw with millennials was the time frame reduction.
Not so much from a student perspective, but just to say, I sometimes think higher education is a very traditional environment, and I just noticed as we're hiring positions, we are less focused on that as an issue. It's not a red flag anymore. And I'm very thankful for that, because I think the mobility and the trends and the things that impact our work are happening so rapidly. We have to be open to the fact that people are moving in order to have those experiences, build those portfolios of skills. So at least in a well-entrenched traditional environment, we're even saying, it's okay.
The only thing I would have to add with that is we've been using that as ways we pitch our jobs, since mine is a temporary part-time, both at the Whitecaps and the Van Andel, is that you can do your other jobs while still working for us, and we just have to think that way as my pitch more than a reality for my job. But for each person, it's, hey, this is just part-time. You can still jump around because they do want to do that.
And I think the only thing that I would add, probably from the employer perspective, is as an employer thinking about, because this is a dynamic, how do we make room for that in our organizations? And it kind of takes me back to that hero to host piece that I talked about with the collaborative intelligence. So how do we create systems and processes within our organization where there's more of like a hosting, mind share system that's happening, so that when folks are exiting, they're not just like the linchpin of the organization and then everything sort of falls apart, because we know that nowadays folks aren't staying in the positions as long.
Amy, my comment was just going to be, they're doing it also because the market's changed. There's more jobs than there are applicants, so it's become okay. Like, I have several folks that are like 18, 19, and I was coaching them, like, you've already had 5 or 6 jobs since high school. That's going to catch up with you, and it doesn't. They can get the next job, they can get because there's not enough of them. So I think that stigma of how long have you stayed in a job is going away, because it has to. There's just not enough workers. So I think we're putting our expectation on them, and the world has changed. I don't think that's going to go away from that perspective. That's just my feedback.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a baby boomer, and on the early end of the baby boomer thing. And I think one of the things that is different about baby boomers, if we use this slide as a way of trying to help understand how all the generations work together and how to be able to work best with each of those, there's one word in there that I would suggest that maybe there's a better word for, and that's retirement. My father was born in 1923, okay, so he retired a long time ago. He retired. When he retired, he worked for Ford Motor Company on Friday. On Monday, he didn't. And that was it. It was a line. I have a lot of friends of mine who are baby boomers, and very, very few of them are retiring that way. We're not retiring, we're refocusing. And I think one of the things, Mike, you were talking about the the iGen people wanting to work for the Whitecaps and for having, and for using that as a first job, as a way of building their career, finding the right activity there, the right role there to do that. I think what's happening too is you're starting to see some of the baby boomers move into some of those roles. And I think there's a great opportunity to try to exploit the experience of the baby boomers to help the iGens in those same kind of roles. So, that's my piece.
I try to do that every summer as best I can. Get the baby boomers to help out our iGen, and it's a fun environment to be in. Like I said, everything I do is different. If I have to call one of our baby boomers and they want to talk for 45 minutes, or if I need to text or send a Snapchat to our, it's. I think you're right.
Most of my baby boomer friends text all the time.
Yeah, they are getting better with that. They are getting better with that.
The world has changed. We're not the way we were in the 90s.
Yeah,
We're different too.
It's a target audience that we are looking to hire.
If you know any baby boomers who want to work at the Whitecaps,
especially in Traverse City, we need a lot of people up there.
Go ahead.
What are some ways that organizations, as the iGen continues to come in there, I think from an organizational standpoint, you probably write a book or have a whole class on this, but what are some steps that organizations can do to train their, like I think when you have a manager managing someone from a different generation, how do you, I think of, you used an example before of the difference between the iGen and their openness about what they're feeling and that kind of thing, as opposed to someone in the Gen X who might, take care of yourself. Like, why are you talking about your feelings? Like, that's a personal matter. How do you help them coach and train and help that employee? I mean, but it's, I guess the question, but what can organizations do to facilitate that kind of culture in their organization?
I think having people attend stuff like this definitely will help. I know at our organization we talk about it all the time in different meetings, and we have different groups of people in those. It's just the open dialogue, putting the, like Brianna said, bringing the tightrope into a circle. I think that's what we do a lot of, is you guys are all on the same team. Let's do it together. That's what I got for that.